Hello, personal and professional development enthusiasts. Today, I have Jeff Zimmerman with me on our podcast, who is a Fulbright scholar at the University of Page and associate professor at the Northern Kentucky University. And he's got a PhD in organizational development, as well as an MBA from Klagenfurt in Austria. So in today's video, we'll be discussing what is self-efficacy, how to build up your self-efficacy, what are the traits of people with high self-efficacy, and how to keep your confidence in check if you have achieved that. Stay tuned because Jeff's about to provide tremendous amount of value and really deep insight, great tips for you if you're looking to increase your self-efficacy. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Mike.
Jeff, how did you get into coaching?
My father was a U.S. football coach for a number of years before I was born. And so when we were growing up, we always had dinner table discussions about coaching in teams and groups. And I'm also one of 6 kids. Being in that environment, always being surrounded by other people, there's always a lot of moving parts. It was very intriguing for me to study and research why teams and groups function the way they do. And again, that started from an early age. The other thing that's really, I would say, unique to my situation was not only that my dad was a U.S. football coach, but I'm also a member of a set of triplets. So I have a brother and a sister that are my age. And so growing up, I always had this sense of connection to 2 other people who were the exact same age as I was. And we were a team, whether we realized it or not. My brother and sister and I were always going through different experiences, and it was together. And so sometimes things worked out well, sometimes not so well. So I think that early on, those early childhood experiences really played a role in what I later ended up studying at university. And so I took my initial interest in teams and groups, and especially obviously just in conversations I've had with my father and other members of my family along the way. And I started following that passion for teamwork as an undergraduate. I studied organizational leadership as an undergraduate. And then as a graduate student at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria, I was able to take classes in group dynamics, which is another part of my background as well. And so that initial interest in teams and then the subsequent interest in group dynamics in graduate school eventually led to me getting a PhD in organizational development and group dynamics from the University of Klagenfurt. I've never gone back since. I've always followed that passion for teamwork. And interestingly enough, with teamwork, coaching is very much a part of our lives, whether it's on the athletic field or whether it's in professional lives at work. Since I joined academia like 16 years ago, I've never gone away from coaching and teamwork since then. And so there's always various streams, whether it's with my research or whether it's with different consulting things that I do, but coaching is always there. And it's been there for a long time.
Yes, I can fully appreciate how it was already a little organization at your home, being one of 6 children,
Mhm.
3 of them who are triplets, right? And your father
Yeah.
being a football coach. I can just
Yep.
picture how that was going. What was that like as an experience for you?
It was normal. It's just like we had 6 kids around the table. We go 4 liters of milk a day as a family. So just to give you perspective on that.
Parenting perspective for
Yeah.
your mom and dad to keep that unit organized, were they like very strict or they very structured?
Yes, they had to be. When we were kids, we had on the refrigerator door, we had a list of jobs, right? There were 6 jobs that had to be done during the week. And it ranged from folding clothes to emptying the dishwasher to setting the table, clearing the table, doing the dishes. And there's one other thing in there as well. And each week your job switched. But the worst job was socks, folding socks. Because when you have 8 people in a house, there are a lot of socks that have to be folded.
Right?
And it was the most time consuming and it was the least appreciated, but it was also one of the most necessary ones. So if you were bad that week, you were relegated to folding socks. So that was how our parents organized the chaos of the 6 kids.
When you grew up and you got into companies and organizations, did you pick up similar patterns that you experienced at home, maybe?
I learned this subsequently just through my studies and whatnot. But we're very much influenced in the present by what's already happened in the past. So like our previous experience will impact our current expectations and whatnot. Whenever I walk into an organization today, and if I'm doing an organizational assessment or analysis, I'm very often looking for patterns that I've also seen in numerous organizations, but also in teams from that I've been a part of or I've observed or I've studied even 20 years ago. It's like a continual cycle of different patterns that you start noticing things early on and you see how it plays out. No surprise here, humans are creatures of habit, right? And organizations are made up of humans. So organizations are creatures of habit as well. And so, yes, there are definitely insights, patterns that I've seen from long ago, even in my childhood and then on those teams that are replicating themselves even today.
Thank you for sharing that. That's
Mhm.
really valuable insight. So, what is coaching?
Ah, Ah, so I think there's a lot of different definitions. I'm of the opinion that there's more than one way to do something, so to speak. So there's probably more than one way to define coaching. In my opinion, coaching is simply when someone is able to unlock the potential of another person or another team. And they do that in a number of ways, particularly by removing obstacles.
And how would coaching be different from therapy, let's say?
Coaching is about raising the belief of someone or raising their self-efficacy. That's another way of putting it. And we can do that in a number of ways. So I can raise somebody's self-efficacy by just saying, hey, you did a good job the last time. So now I think you can do a good job this time. Or I can raise somebody's sense of self-efficacy by showing them how to do something before I ask them to do it, because they've seen me do it. And so now they think that, oh, if he can do it, then I can do it. So that's coaching. But therapy is different in the sense therapy is about helping people to understand what's going on with them or with the situation, and to provide them with different coping skills to help resolve any issues in that situation. So it's slightly different, right? Coaching is raising your self-efficacy about something, but therapy is more about helping people understand what's going on and how to effectively cope with whatever is going on.
And what is the psychology of coaching? How does it actually work?
The interesting thing about coaching, which differentiates it from, especially from mentoring, a lot of people think coaching and mentoring are the same thing. They're actually not. They're very similar, but they're different, because both coaching and mentoring, for example, will help people to raise their self-efficacy, their belief that they can successfully do something, right? So if I'm sitting in front of a piano and I want to play Mary Had a Little Lamb or whatever song it is, if I've never played that song before, I'm thinking to myself, okay, how am I going to be able to do this? If I'm coaching, then my job as the coach for that person who's about to sit down and play that song on the piano, my job is to increase their belief that before they do the task, they can actually successfully do the task. So there's a sense of belief there. And there are things that I can do as a coach, like I was saying earlier, that will raise somebody's belief or it will hurt somebody's belief. And so a lot of the psychology of coaching is simply helping people to believe that they can do something. And the other interesting thing about coaching is that coaches don't have to be experts in whatever the field is that they're coaching. The only thing they really have to be an expert at is raising somebody's belief that they can do it. Now, if I'm a mentor, for example, and I'm mentoring somebody on the piano, for example, then I have to have previous experience in playing the piano. But as a coach, I don't have to have previous experience or expertise. I'll give you an example of it, right? So there are innumerable, let's say, sports coaches out there, especially on the professional level, who may have been maybe subpar or just average players or even professional players, but they were exceptional coaches. The question then becomes, how can you be an average player but an amazing coach, right? Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots in the National Football League in the USA was not a great football player. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't great. But he was a great coach. Bill Belichick, for example, has found ways as a coach to raise the level of self-efficacy of his players. There are so many other examples of this. Like even my dad was a football coach, right? An American college football coach. He wasn't the head coach. He was like one of these position coaches. His most effective coaching role wasn't necessarily him coaching the position that he played in. It was actually him doing a totally different task on the football team, but unrelated to what he actually coached. He can do that because even though he didn't have previous experience in the exact task he was doing, he could coach them effectively because he knew enough about how to raise people's motivation, even if he didn't have the same experience that they were being asked to do.
So, Hoda, you mentioned a couple of things there about
Yeah.
coaching. One was to increase the self-belief and to keep people motivated. So these are the two
Yes.
things that stood out for me from what you said. So let's say you mentioned sports coaching, and we can transfer this to leadership coaching. So when we talk about leadership coaching, you're not actually giving people the skills or the tool set to become better leaders, but you just making them believe that they can be the leaders and you motivate them.
By making people believe they can do something, whether it's leading, whether it's playing the piano, whether it is running a science experiment or whatever. When somebody does something well, they gain a sense of self-confidence. That self-confidence becomes more influential when they're dealing with other people. Leadership is when one person influences a group of people to try and achieve a common goal. So leadership is about influence. If we take a step back, we say, okay, if I'm starting out this new task and I believe that I can do it well, and then I do it well, after I do it well, my self-confidence increases. And when that self-confidence increases and other people see me do it well, I tend to start having more influence over them, especially if I can do it even better than them. And so when you roll it back, you look at it, you say, okay, your belief that you can do something leads to self-efficacy, and your self-efficacy leads to you doing well in the task, and doing well in the task increases your influence over other people who might be connected to that task. And so by virtue of that, you can impact your leadership ability as well. If you can raise people's belief that they can do something, you can also increase their effectiveness, so to speak, as a leader. It doesn't mean they're faking it as a leader. It means they're actually leading through the influence that they have in the roles that they have.
So on the internet, there are several,
Mhm.
say, marketing coaches or business coaches
Mhm.
and whatever. So when we talk about coaching, basically what you're saying that these people are only there to increase your belief that you can
Yeah.
actually do what you set out to do and achieve, but they're not going to actually give you the most effective tools or the methods and the ways to actually get it done. Is that what you say?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying for coaching to be effective, all you really have to do, all else being equal, is raise somebody's belief in something. Let's say you have to run a very difficult meeting, right? You have a team project coming up and you've got 5 people you're working with and you have a very tight deadline. It's due in 7 days. And your boss is breathing down your neck to get this thing done and to do it well, right? What I'm saying though is that before you walk into that meeting as the leader of that team, if you have doubts, any kind of a doubt, maybe you're not sure about the people with whom you're working or you're not sure about the task itself, then a coach for you might be somebody who you go to a day or two before the meeting. You say, hey, can you give me some tips on how you would run this meeting? And they say, yeah, I think, Jeff, you should do A, B, and C in this meeting to make this meeting a success and to make sure you finish the project successfully within 7 days, right? The reason I went to that person was to get tips on how I could do my task more effectively because I wasn't sure, right? I was a little bit hesitant. I doubted myself a little bit beforehand. And so what I do is I go to somebody who has a little bit more knowledge about this or who I think has some insight that can help me, a coach in this case, or maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's somebody who's been through it already, right? And I go to them and I say, hey, what are your tips for me? And they say, well, I would do this and this. When they tell me that and I bounce these ideas off them, after bouncing those ideas off them, I usually feel a little bit better before I walk into that meeting. And that's how coaching makes us feel more confident about what we're doing. I mentioned this earlier. Coaches tend to remove obstacles that we face, whether it's on the sports field or whether it's in business conference room, right? And there are a lot of obstacles, especially in business, right? You've got colleagues
Right.
that might be difficult to work with. You have limited time, right? That's tough. You have limited resources, right? Again, time is one of those, money, whatever, right? And with all these limitations, we're still expected to do the same or more than we previously used to do. And that's not easy. So we start to doubt ourselves, right? Can I do this project in 7 days when I only have a certain number of hours between now and the time that it's due, right? And so I start doubting myself, right? But when I talk to a coach who says, hey, yes, some of that might be true, but here's the other side of it. Yes, you have limited hours, but you also have more people who can help you and you can delegate to them as well. And so that coach who you're going to, even if it's just like a 5 minute conversation with them, and you're not even calling them a formal coach, but in a sense, they're acting as a coach because they're making you believe that you can do a task before you actually engage in that task, right? And so coaches, like a lot of things, they can come and go very quickly.
So you're like a super high level person who's teaching at 2 universities, you got a PhD, and yet here you are saying that coaches tell. Now, there are some organizations out there that claim that in coaching, you can only ask questions and all the answers have to come from the coaches and you can backtrack, you can repeat their words back to them to help them get more clarity, but you're not allowed to give input. What's your take
Right,
on that?
right. My opinion, everyone's got their thing. And there's, like I said before, be a more effective coach if, yes, obviously you have to ask questions, but if you're also allowed to provide insight, because that's what people are looking to a coach for, because coaches are also there to provide information. Provide insight in this case, or to remove obstacles, like I said before. And if the coach is not allowed to provide their take on it, their perspective on something, right? They're only allowed to ask questions. I think that you hinder the coach being able to help that person increase their self efficacy.
So you mentioned self-efficacy a number of times now. What is it? What is self-efficacy?
Yeah. So that's great. It's a great thing. So I didn't know what self-efficacy was until I had to research it and study it. So self-efficacy in general, and again, many different definitions on this. I go with the definition that I've seen the most often. And it's essentially, in general terms, self-efficacy is when basically it's a person's belief that they can successfully do a task before they do the task. Before they sit down at the piano, if they're about to play a song they've never played before, the level of their belief that they can be successful in playing that song before they do it is their level of self-efficacy.
What's the difference between self-efficacy, self-esteem, and self-confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. Self efficacy, again, is your belief that you can successfully do a task, right? Self-esteem is your sense of self-worth. So I have a higher sense of self-esteem if I feel good about myself or my previous experience or XYZ fill in the blank. So self-esteem is all about your internal perspective on your own self-worth, your self-value, right? And then self-confidence is very similar and very close to self-efficacy, but self-confidence is like a more subtle form of self-esteem, self-efficacy. And so in many cases, you could equate self-efficacy with self-confidence, but I tend to defer to the self-efficacy rather than
So what
self-confidence.
would be the nuance between the two? If you could maybe describe it through an example so that it's clear for the listener.
Self-efficacy, it's your intrinsic internal belief that you can successfully do something before you start that something, whatever it is. Leading a difficult meeting, having a difficult conversation, letting an employee go, giving tough critical feedback, that's self-efficacy. Self-confidence, in my opinion, more of a generalized term that can be equated with self-efficacy, but oftentimes self-confidence is often equated with only positive outcomes. But with self-efficacy, it's always either a positive or a negative.
Even if you don't succeed in doing something, feeling okay about not succeeding at it, or what do you mean, or putting
Yeah,
that
to an
down to
extent,
learning?
especially, yes, with self-efficacy, yes, especially if you succeed or not, yes, we want to succeed in something, right? But with self-efficacy, if we don't succeed, we want to start asking ourselves questions. Okay, why did we not succeed? Was it X? Was it Y? Was it Z? There's
Hmm.
probably a reason there. And with self-confidence, we don't really go into the same, in my opinion, we don't really go in when we're analyzing self-confidence. We don't go into the same level of depth, detail when analyzing self-confidence. But they are in many cases the same thing, but there are some slight differences. And so I tend to defer to self-efficacy because it's easier to measure than I do with self-confidence.
So what would be some examples of having high self-efficacy?
And here's the thing. So high self-efficacy is very much equated with an initial belief prior to starting something that you can do this 100%. So really, it's that internal belief, like, yeah, I've got this. But the true measure of whether you can do something and the most effective way of increasing your self-efficacy is simply by having previous experience doing whatever it is you're about to do. So if before I'm asked to play this song on the piano, if I've already played that song 20 times and the last few times I've done pretty well at it, then my self-efficacy is going to be through the roof, right? Because previous practice is the best indicator of high self-efficacy. Limited practice or no practice is the best indicator that you're going to have middle or low self-efficacy. So, and it could be anything. It could be playing the piano, it could be having that difficult conversation with a colleague. It could be how you handle a conflict at work, right? All difficult things, all challenging, all unknown. You never know if you don't know if you're going to be successful or not. But previous experience, especially practice, they call it mastery experiences in the psychological literature, right? Mastery experiences, practice is the best way to increase your self-efficacy.
What are some other ways, maybe? Are there other ways to increase
Yeah,
self-efficacy, especially if you're
absolutely.
starting out, you don't have the historic experience, you don't have the
Yep.
practice. What else can you do?
Exactly, because we have to start somewhere, right? There's going to be a point where you've never had that difficult conversation, right? Or you've never given a challenging speech or a presentation, or you made it, you did this really complex report for your boss or something like that, right? Mastery experiences are the most effective way that the researchers know that we can improve our self-efficacy. It's the quickest, most effective. Practice, mastery experiences. That's number one. The second one is vicarious experiences. Basically, by vicarious, it means that we watch someone else do what we are asked to do, right? So if I'm expected to run an interview tomorrow with a new hire for an organization, right? If I've never given an interview or I've never conducted an interview before, then vicarious experience means that before I go and I do that interview, I watch somebody else give a similar interview. And by me watching them give an interview, however they do it, through my observations, I learn and I see that, oh, you know what? If they can do it, then I can do it too. So that's vicarious experiences. That's the second most effective way, right? Third way is through social persuasion. And social persuasion is nothing more than before you engage in a task that you've never done, for example, right? Somebody comes to you and says, hey, I know you've done a good job with this kind of thing in the past. And I think that because of that, you can also do a good job here. So good luck. You can do this, right? It's like a pat on the back, right? That's social persuasion, right? So we've got mastery experiences, we've got vicarious experiences, and then we have social persuasion. The fourth way is basically reducing stress, reducing your own stress and enhancing your own physical status. That's how they name it. It's basically doing things that make you feel good about yourself. And the interesting thing about that is that reducing stress and enhancing your physical status, so to speak, right? It has nothing to do with the task itself, right? The previous three things all had you either practicing the task or you watched somebody do the task, or before you did the task, somebody said, hey, you can do this, right? But the fourth one has nothing to do with the task itself. It's all on you, right? So I remember when I was a when I was a teenager, before we take these standardized tests in the USA, they would say, get a good night's sleep, eat a good breakfast, and dress in something that makes you feel confident, right? Because doing all these things that are totally unrelated to the test, right, that you're about to take, right? It's a 4-hour test. Doing all these things will actually make you feel a little bit more confident about what you're going to be doing. But again, it has nothing to do with the test itself. It's the same reason why when we go into, let's say, an interview, right? Or we go up in front of a group of 1,000 people and we're giving a speech, chances are we're probably going to do things that make us, or it would be smart or wise if we did things that made us feel good about ourselves before we walked up and did that difficult task, right? And dressing a certain way, getting proper rest and exercise, eating properly before, and doing the things that make you feel a little bit better can actually increase your self-efficacy. And that's the fourth way.
That's super valuable, and I believe anyone who listens to this, they can take away a lot from this, because really using these techniques that you just described, you can build yourself up and you can build your self-efficacy up, and especially if you get someone to help you do that as well, because you can't coach yourself football, right? That's why you have somebody to
So somebody else.
perspective. So same in business, same in personal development, you just need the outside perspective, someone who will help you achieve your goals, right?
Exactly. And that's the other thing too, I would add, if you don't mind, like
Please.
every single one of us feels vulnerable in things that we're doing. So whether it's starting a new job, whether we've been in a job for 10 years and we're trying a new task that's a difficult task in the job, we still feel vulnerable. We still doubt ourselves. And that's challenging. And we doubt ourselves because we might not have the previous experience that we otherwise would like to have. So we have questions, right? Everyone has been in the situation where on the first day of a new job, maybe you don't know something and you're questioning, oh my gosh, who do I ask? Who do I ask to help get my computer fixed? Who do I ask to figure out where I take this report, or how I fix this machine, or how I do whatever, right? So we all have these questions, especially starting early and starting out on roles where we need answers. And coaches are in a position oftentimes to help provide answers, right? And even if they can't provide the answers that we're looking for, they can at least help us to increase our initial confidence before we jump and do this difficult task. And so that's one of the valuable roles of coaches, is they can help to provide information and insight on things, even if they don't have the previous experience in whatever it is we're doing.
So I would like to explore the other spectrum a little bit as well, if you will.
Yeah.
What would you say about people who are overconfident, who have overly high self-efficacy, let's say?
I say that's great, but in my experience with the organizations that I've studied and worked with and through the research, it's never a bad idea to have a healthy sense of humility. Because the moment we are overly confident, that's usually the case. If not, then at some point you're going to get blindsided because of your confidence, right? And so having a sense of confidence or self-efficacy that is too high, it usually can set you up for some problems. And that's why I always recommend having a healthy dose of humility, being humble and saying, hey, you know what? I know I've played this song 1,000 times, but even if I play it one more time, I could still mess up. Or I know that I've made thousands of hires over the course of my 20 or 30 years in this business, but even though I've done well so many times, the next time I could still fail and land flat on my face, right?
So you work a lot with young adults at the universities. Would you give some tips to people who may have watched a lot of these motivational videos on social media and they think they can just go out there and conquer the world and build a massive business, and they feeling ready, but they might be lacking the skills and the actual knowledge that it requires to make that happen. So they might be a little bit overconfident, they might be a little bit cocky, they might be super hyped up from these videos, and they might just need a reality check. What would you tell them?
I would say, and I've been there too. When I was graduating undergrad with my bachelor's degree, we were made to think that we were smart, we were intelligent, and that we could do anything. Great. I love the message, right? And I agree with them to an extent, right? But when I got into my first job, I was blindsided by how much I didn't know. And so my message for everybody would be, you don't know what you don't know. Whatever your previous experiences, whatever credentials or grades or experiences, working experience or whatever you have, that's wonderful, right? You can use that to your advantage. But realize that there's always somebody out there who can do it better, who knows more. And because of that, we've got to be ready for that possibility, right? And if we are overly confident and cocky and arrogant about something, at some point, we're going to meet that person probably sooner rather than later. And it's going to blindside us too. So I'd say, remember, you don't know what you don't know. Stay humble and keep working hard. Because from the research that I've done, the organizations I've been with, the one thing that matters more than almost anything, particularly in just achieving things. And by achieving, I mean accomplishing a task successfully, whether it's playing that song on the piano, whether it's having successfully leading a project, opening a new wing of a hospital, whatever, right? The one thing that you can never get enough of is simply working hard, right? Most successful people, when you look at the research and the studies, most successful people are usually the people who have probably failed the most, but they've also worked the hardest. And so I forget who said it, but it basically, there was a quote in a book, and The book was about a group of very high achieving, very intellectual people. It looked at them at the age of 25, and then it looked at them at the age of 50 and 75. And it looked at all the different things that they'd accomplished. And the psychologists who were studying these people basically concluded that in order to be more effective, being smart and intelligent was one thing, right? But being smart and intelligent doesn't matter after a certain point. What really matters is how hard you're willing to work. Nobody who was like extremely accomplished, let's say I'll go into some Michael Phelps, right? Or they're Michael Jordan, or if you're a gymnast or a professional athlete or a great CEO or just a great team leader, all these people worked hard, every single one of them. And so the quote that I was referring to, basically it says, it is better to have somebody who is maybe somewhat high on intelligence, but really high on work ethic, rather than to have somebody who is really high on intelligence with a middle level of work ethic. So work ethic, being willing to engage in the day-to-day grind, so to speak, is pretty much the most important factor in determining whether you're going to be successful at something long term.
My experience
Right?
from sports as well. So I was
Yep.
training kickboxing, and my trainer, he was a 9 times world champion. He said to me that when people come to our gym, it's not the most talented athletes that become the most successful. It's the average athletes, because they don't have that cockiness, they don't have that overconfidence, so they work harder. They attend the
Yeah.
training, they don't skip the training, they don't go out drinking, they don't go out partying, they
Yeah.
put their head down, they put the work in, they get the results. The people who are talented, they tend to get overconfident, and because they have an inflated ego or self-belief, they let their guard down, they make mistakes, and they fade away because they can't deal with the losses, they can't deal with the shame of being overtaken by mediocre people who just worked harder than them.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I think, again, like if you have more money, more relationships, more higher credentials, higher academic achievements or whatever, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're not willing to work hard. And I think the other thing I would add to that is being willing to work hard is extremely important. The other thing that's really helpful, and I'm seeing this more and more because we also do research in this as well, is finding someone who you can bounce questions off of, whether it's a coach or a mentor or just a friend down the street who has nothing to do with your business or your job or whatever. When you have somebody who you can go to with questions, or it could even be a spouse, for example, right? When you have somebody who you can go to for questions, because again, we all have questions at different times, right? Even if they can't provide you with an answer, but they can at least listen and hear you out, that is something that we've seen people who are very high achieving. Again, doesn't mean they're the wealthiest or whatever, right? But in their respective, they tend to be very well accomplished, so to speak, right? Is yes, they work hard, but they also build relationships with other people who can help them to answer questions that they don't know or that they don't have the answers to yet. So as you're starting out in anything, whether you're a 17-year-old, you just graduated from high school, or you just graduated from college, or you just got fired from a job that you thought was right, and now you're starting a new career, build relationships with people who have been there and who have done that a little bit more than you do about whatever it is you're getting into, because they provide valuable insight that can be very helpful as you engage in whatever that new activity is.
Thank you for that insight. That's super helpful as well. It's good to have somebody on your side to bounce ideas off of. Jeff, thank you. Thank you for all your insights. Now, if somebody would like to work with you as a coach, as an organizational development professional, where can they reach you?
Honestly, they can reach me at my US university. If they just Google my name, Jeff Zimmerman at Northern Kentucky University, they'll be able to find my contact information there. And so my email is posted there, which is zimmermanj3@nku.edu. So Northern Kentucky University.edu. Or again, just Google Jeff Zimmerman.
All right, we put these links in the description of the video as well, so people who might want to use your consulting or coaching services for their
Yeah.
organizations can reach out to you and get in touch.
Yeah. I'm
Thank you
always happy
for
to
all
help
the
you.
insights, Jeff, and sharing this wealth of knowledge that you have brought to us today about self-efficacy and how to build self-efficacy and how to keep your confidence in check as well, how to build a business successfully. So we've learned a lot. Thank you so much, Jeff.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Take care.